And so he was going on about this because he is, in addition to everything else, stupid. And stupid in the sense that all of our leaders are stupid. Like, they just say things they don't understand, they haven't thought through, they don't really mean it, and to the extent they mean it, they don't understand why they mean it. They're children, okay? We're at war with Russia. Why? How's that gonna end? Oh, shut up. You work for Putin, racist. Okay, got it. Anyway, yeah, they're dumb. You would never hire them. They can't get jobs. That's why they've created this whole system where useless people get rich and famous. It's called the US economy. But anyway.
Welcome back to Drop the Mask. I'm your host, Jason, and I'm ready to rock. I got a good feeling this one's gonna be a banger. Like Tucker Carlson said in that opening clip, our leaders are stupid. Really, they're all some combination of stupid and evil. And that's why I'm here. It's my goal to make clear to everyone just how bad they are and why they're wrong. And it's not just the leaders on one side or the other. We're conditioned into this false binary choice where we're supposed to believe that one side is just going to wreck the country and one side is good. But in practice, there's basically only one side running the whole game. And they're not on your side. Because no matter what kind of government you have, it's giving undue power to a select few. They're a parasitic class that think they can run your life better than you. And what makes it hard for people to see this is that we're being fed an illusion. What the left and right argue about is a constructed window of allowable debate. It's only about things that don't actually matter, at least on the large scale. And the people we supposedly elect as leaders are not the ones actually running the show. Some have more involvement than others, but you can't tell me that Joe Biden, at 83 years old, with now pretty severe dementia, is the one calling the shots. No one can tell you that with a straight face. But still, you expect those figureheads to be at least a little bit competent. So even knowing that Biden is not really in charge, it's still a little bit jarring to see him basically just sunsetted out of the job. Like, I don't miss him, but where is he? We don't even have a fake president right now. He's just gone. And the two people leading the race for president starting in January aren't much better. They both generally do not demonstrate that minimum level of competence that you ought to expect from the so-called leader of the free world. On that note, people have been talking about this interview Kamala Harris did on Fox News, saying it was just an absolute disaster for her. And a few clips were going around that did not look great for her, so I had to go check it out. But I have to say, after watching the whole thing, I was pretty disappointed. A few moments were bad, but guys, you're not going to like this. Hell, I don't like it myself. But this was not the train wreck I was promised. She looked better than she normally does. It's a low bar, I know. But this interview is not going to move the needle in the way that her opponents want, especially if her previous appearances haven't already. So if you hate Kamala Harris, there's going to be parts of this you don't like. And if you do like her, there's going to be parts of this you don't like too. Just to give you some context, in case you haven't been paying attention, this is the Kamala that I'm used to seeing. This is a mashup of Michael Malice talking with Joe Rogan, intermixed with some actual clips of Kamala Harris speaking. I think he nails it.
Right.
If you're going after Officer Harris, you're either racist or sexist or ableist.
Right.
So they will use...
Ableist.
Yeah, because she's a retard.
Jesus.
She's literally retarded. I mean... Ukraine is a country in Europe, and Russia is another country, and a powerful country, and Russia invaded Ukraine, and that's wrong.
What's really important?
Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a powerful country. Russia decided to invade a smaller country called Ukraine. So basically, that's wrong.
Okay, I want to pause it there. It's like she was trying to explain the situation to a 5-year-old. But no, this was her response to adults about why we need to be fighting and funding Ukraine indefinitely. I think that's just her and also most people's level of understanding. Russia bad because they're big. And that's expected from regular people. But for the Vice President of the United States of America, that alone should be disqualifying. You're running to be the commander-in-chief, and you don't know the first thing about it. Beyond just not seeming to know anything about Ukraine or Russia except their relative size, Framing it that way as big versus small countries is itself an issue. This may be pointing out the obvious, but the United States is also a very big country, the biggest in terms of wealth and power, and our government is constantly invading and provoking smaller countries into wars. So maybe we should be a little more careful about drawing that comparison. Because, yeah, like Kamala says, basically that's wrong. Okay, let's go on.
I think of her as America's wine mom because bitch seems like she's 3 deep by noon. And she's got the 3 phases of wine mom. She's got happy drunk. Oh my God, this cereal's got a rabbit on it. It's so great. Cackling, cackling, cackling.
Look at my bus! Oh my God, I love it. Oh wow. Look at the bus. Wheels on the bus. Go round and round.
Then there is trying to drunk at work, where you're trying to make sense, but you don't. Space is around us all and unites us all and inspires us all.
Space is exciting. It spurs our imaginations, and it forces us to ask big questions. Space, it affects us all, and it connects us all.
And then there's I'm being stern so you don't realize how plastered I am, and I'm making a point. That little girl was me. Now I'm going to go upstairs and don't knock on the door because I'm going to pass out.
And, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
It's pretty bad. And Malice isn't the first one to notice that she looks drunk most of the time she was appearing in public. Do a search for Kamala drunk on Twitter and you can find dozens of clips and probably millions of people talking about it. And don't get me wrong, if I had to be Joe Biden's VP and deal with the media and other assholes all day, every day, I'd probably be drunk all the time too. But it's pretty obvious. Here's another example, and I'm sorry for people just listening who can't see it. You can hear it in her voice a little bit, but it's definitely visible. It's a quick one. Here it is.
I will snatch their patent so that we will take over. And yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. It's the question is, do you have the will to do it? I have the will to do it.
So not only is she threatening to use government to steal from companies and take over their business, she's pretty clearly inebriated while saying it. This was in 2019, and the full context is that she was talking about the potential to seize some pharmaceutical patents in an effort to implement price controls for specific drugs. Now we could get into a whole thing about intellectual property. The true anarchist position is that IP is not a thing, and I find myself leaning more in that direction as I learn more about it, but I still need to think about it some more. Either way, doing away with patent law so that government can take over is a move in the complete wrong direction, and a very authoritarian one, if you ask me. But this is always the attitude of government. They think they know better than all of us. They believe they have the right to decide who is worthy of what benefit, and they don't care who bears the expense, because it's certainly not them, it's us. So let's get back to this Fox interview with Brett Baer. He really tried to steamroll Kamala here, and I do think that was his intention. It was mildly hostile, he was rude, he was completely uninterested in hearing her answers. And instead, it looked like he was focused solely on getting some good gotcha moments. And I'm not against that. I want all politicians grilled so hard that they just melt into oblivion. But she didn't play into it, and he would have been better off just letting her talk. There were some bad moments, and she kind of devolved into making everything about Trump. I'd guess because that she has no real substance about her. But I'm telling you, for anyone that sees this that was on the fence about going to vote for Kamala, because that's all we're really dealing with now. There's no one on the fence whether they want to vote for Kamala or Trump. The only people on the fence are still deciding whether or not it's worth the effort to go out and vote for the candidate that they marginally prefer. But for people deciding whether or not to go cast a vote for Kamala, if they saw this, they might be inclined to go do it. Now, that doesn't mean she's right about any of her answers. It doesn't make her a good candidate for president. But from a pure persuasion perspective, this is not going to lose her support. And you can see people like Mark Cuban defending it here. And I saw this comment before I watched the interview. I thought he was just being biased. If you don't know, he's been very outspoken against Donald Trump recently. But after I watched the interview, I think he's sort of right. Not all the way, but sort of. He says, "The beautiful thing about the Bret Baier interview is that Kamala Harris understood and responded to each question." Okay, hold on. Well, that's a high bar, right? No, but understanding and responding to questions is certainly something you'd expect from a potential president. That's like the bare minimum. But like I said, this is an improvement for her. Let's go on. Cuban says, "She used examples of policies. She gave real-world context. When Bret went hard after her, she didn't call him names. She didn't quit the interview. She didn't make things up. She never once complained the questions were tough. She never played the victim card. She didn't lose her temper. She didn't take the bait to diminish or talk down to Trump supporters. She stood up to him with force and never backed down." And I'll also add, she didn't cackle inappropriately at anything. So yeah, I think he's mostly right. And that hurts to say, because she's been so terrible in almost everything. Her policies, to the extent she has any, are just more of the same awful state expansion, spending, inflation-causing crap that we've had for decades. So are a lot of Trump's. But there's a good chance she's really getting better at this, at speaking in public. And if you don't want Kamala to be the next president, you might not want to make people go watch this. Because for people that do, who aren't deep into politics, who don't have a deep understanding of the issues like some of us, if anything, I think this interview gains her sympathy. And I know that's not how it should be. It's going to be seen as a male bully picking on a woman. And if she wants to be president, she needs to be able to handle that, of course. But it's not going to matter at the feelings level. And people operate on feelings way more than logic. I guess I've talked about it enough. Let me share some clips from it, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. We'll start where they open up on immigration.
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you,
now,
just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have an
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question. I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And
okay, stopping it there. That shows exactly what I mean. She starts to answer a question, and then Baier talks over her and jumps to a different question. And she doesn't lose her cool. She's assertive and says, "Hey, let me answer your question. Let me talk." And this happens several times. I'm not going to show them all because it just gets repetitive. But here, he's trying to get her to say a number of how many people have come over the border illegally, and she's just not biting. She's giving a decent politician non-answer, where they don't really tell you anything because either they don't know anything or they can't tell you the real answer because they don't want to offend anybody. But so far, she's not bad. For her, anyway. For any politician, for that matter, it's not bad. We'll come back to the immigration thing, though, because that will transition nicely into the second half of the show. But next, I want to go into what she said when asked about how she would be different than Biden.
It's interesting you said turn the page, Madam Vice President. You were asked on 2 different shows last week what, if anything, you would do differently than President Biden. Here's what you said.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Under a Harris administration, what would the major changes be and what would stay the same?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden.
I noticed.
And so that would be one change in terms of, but also I think it's important to say with, 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump.
So you're not Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. I, for example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C. I invite ideas, whether it be from the Republicans who are supporting me, were just on stage with me minutes ago, and the business sector, and others.
All right, so yeah, she gets confronted with a couple of things. She said recently where she's committed to not continuing the Biden regime policy, but she won't nail down exactly how she's going to be different. And this is fair game. Again, I want all politicians to be hit by the media like this. But she doesn't have a good answer. She just says, I bring a different life experience, and she wants to listen to the other side, by which she does not mean real opposition. She's listening to the warmonger Republicans like the Cheneys, who have switched over to her side. Whenever a politician says, I want to work across the aisle and take in ideas from everyone and build consensus, it's always bullshit. There is no consensus, first of all. And I don't think that's going to be a surprise to hear me say that. That's kind of the foundation of my whole philosophy, that even if everything in politics was really as it's presented, as a democratic system where everyone gets a voice and we work together to find solutions for the common good and blah, blah, blah. No, that doesn't work. And when you throw 1,000 layers of corruption on top of it, it's damn sure not going to represent any of us. It just can't. It's too big, and people are much better off being able to pursue their own individual interests than trying to force everyone into one collective entity. But, and you guys aren't going to like this again, it actually works. This strategy of, look how bad the other guy is and I'm not that, with virtually zero actual policy behind it, it works. Because no one, outside of some autistic libertarians, no one actually cares about policy. They care about personalities. They want to feel like it's someone they can trust. And if they do match the one or two issues they really care about, then people project the rest of their values onto that person, and they just follow their gut. It's not how it should be, but it is. This is a game libertarians generally miss and aren't even playing, and that's why someone like Dave Smith would have been so brilliant as the LP candidate. But we're stuck with Chase Oliver. Anyway, let's keep going. Here we're about halfway through the interview, and this is one of those bad moments that went viral, where she gets called out on a crappy answer and is deflecting to talk about Trump instead.
Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam Vice President.
You and I both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade, people have become... But listen, over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me, the former chief of staff to the president, Donald Trump, former defense secretaries, national security advisor, and his vice president. One, that he is unfit to serve, that he is unstable, that he is dangerous, and that people are exhausted with someone who professes to be a leader who spends full time demeaning.
Harris is in this weird situation where she's trying to run as her own person, a new person. And one of her slogans is turn the page, but she is the sitting vice president. So it's fair to ask, what are we turning the page from? She's part of the current regime. So she tries to blame Trump for what's been happening. And Brett reminds her, hey, you are the VP. This is you. And she does get stumped for a second. You know what I mean, she says, and tries to blame the last 4 years on Trump again. And that doesn't mean he isn't responsible for any of it. He is. But to do nothing for 4 years and then say this is something.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
And also, she says in this clip, and she's brought it up at least a couple times throughout the interview, she says, the Republicans that are on stage with me are backing me up. But these are not good people. These are the worst of the Republican Party. They're the neocons that are the reason that the GOP has the reputation for being warmongers. Because they are. Dick Cheney used to be known to the left as a war criminal. He's responsible for getting us into the Iraq War after 9/11 by telling blatant lies. He and George W. Bush, who I think was the puppet in that case, just like Biden is now and just like Kamala would be. But anyway, they're responsible for selling the weapons of mass destruction lie that got us to invade. It had nothing to do with the World Trade Center attack. The aftermath, where people were all rah, rah, America, and where Bush had something like a 90% approval rating, They used that support as an excuse to launch another war. Another bold strategy to align with the absolute worst people. But that just shows you how fake the whole thing is. Clinton and Obama are both responsible for the same things, starting new wars and continuing just horrific human rights violations. But the Republicans used to be the only ones to ever take heat for it from the media. But now, because Trump is here, all that's forgotten, and they're playing this unity card to try to build their support. I talked about this in my last solo episode, how there are several anti-state people lining up on one side, and the most war-happy, big state worshippers are lining up on the other. And the Democrat side, which Kamala is being put up as the face of, is now that warmonger side, which is kind of crazy. And that doesn't mean Trump is good. That doesn't mean I trust the Republicans to do anything right. They won't. Trump is out there rambling about Arnold Palmer's penis at his rallies.
Arnold Palmer was all man, and I say that in all due respect to women, and I love women. But this guy, this is a guy that was all man. But when he took showers with the other pros, they came out of there, they said, oh my God, that's unbelievable.
Yes, that really happened. Along with his weird ramblings about magnets and sharks and God knows what else. Look, I'm not trying to tell you that because Kamala lacks substance, that means Trump has it. He doesn't. But instead of calling him out on substance, the Democrats just shoot themselves in the foot by making up lies like this one.
The one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people. And here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest.
So if you actually heard him talk about this, it's very obvious that Trump was referring to the government. There are enemies in the government, and he's right about that. They're our worst enemy. Again, don't expect him to do anything about it. He doesn't have the level of understanding to know how or even who the real enemies are, but at least he has the level of instinct to know that there are enemies within. On the left, you have people that worship the state. The state is their religion. They hold up a phony expert class that gave us all the COVID nonsense, that thinks they can manage the global economy while we're all getting poorer by the day. This is what you get with both parties. Trump worked his way in, and they don't like that. And as bad as he is, he's not one of them. He's a threat just by trying to do his own thing, however misguided and wrong it might be. It's not going along with the plan. But this is just one of the many things they take out of context and spin into absolute lies. I hate defending Trump, but just tell the truth. There's so many real things you can hit him on that are bad. When you do this, you lose all credibility. But I guess if they hit him on the real things, they'd be telling on themselves, because they all do the same things, like inflation and wars and spending, expanding the government. They all do it. Anyway, I want to show one more clip before we go back to the immigration thing. This question in particular highlights how the media influences government, something that I've talked about in the past. In many ways, the media has control on what the government can do and get away with. But this question itself is telling.
You were asked on 60 Minutes about the biggest threat that the world faces, that the U.S. faces. This is what you said.
Which foreign country do you consider to be our greatest adversary?
Okay, hold up right there. So, presidential candidates get asked this question every cycle. And when you think about it, it's kind of weird. It's taken as a given that we're supposed to have foreign adversaries. Yes, I know there are a lot of bad people out there that rise to the level of leader of a nation. But is it just a given that they are then our geopolitical foe? Do we have to fight them? And this question is always asked, who's the biggest threat to us? Assuming there's more than one. And look, I'm not naive. I know there are going to be people out there that want what we have and would use violence against us if they have the chance. But it's much more beneficial for both parties, the people of both countries, I mean, to work together, not to fight. But every candidate gets pulled into this, like they must have an answer, and that there are multiple threats to us that we need to be worried about. But they don't ask the question if that really is the case, and if so, why are there so many people that are after us? How did we get here? And they can't ask that because it gives away the game. If you start pulling at those threads, you get down to the facts that the US government is the one at the end of the string, pulling and poking, and very often starting conflicts from scratch, at the very least, inflaming the ones that already existed. But let's see what Kamala says.
I think there's an obvious one in mind, which is Iran. Iran has American blood on their hands. What we need to do to ensure that Iran never achieves the ability to be a nuclear power, that is one of my highest priorities.
If that's the case, what do you say to critics who look at the actions of your administration and say you're not acting like Iran is the #1 threat?
Well, I will tell you most recently, whether it was in April or in October, and then several hours on each occasion that Iran posed a threat to Israel, I was there.
Iran. Well, Kamala was there, guys. She was in the room when discussions happened. That's something, I guess. But this is now the new thing. Iran is the biggest threat now, even though we are currently in a proxy war with Russia, the biggest nuclear power in the world. I'm not going to tell you that Iran's leadership is good. It doesn't seem like it. But we're in the United States. Who knows what the truth is? They, the regime, will tell you Iran is such a big threat, but they don't say why. There's conflict there with Israel, and we know that Israel controls a large portion of the U.S. government, and I'd guess that has a lot to do with it. I'm not the expert in this stuff. It gets really complicated. But again, why do we have to be foes? There's nothing about Iranians, or Russians for that matter, that makes them naturally opposed to Americans. I've worked with a lot of Iranians. They're great people, some of the best. These international conflicts are about leaders trying to prove who's the most macho. And then 99.99% of the people, the rest of us, we all have to suffer with the fallout. But let's get back to the immigration stuff. So here's Kamala again being asked about her border positions.
There's a lot of people that look back at what you said in 2019 when you first ran for president. And there have been changes, and you've talked about some of them. When it comes to immigration, you supported allowing immigrants in the country illegally to apply for driver's license, to qualify for free tuition at universities, to be enrolled in free health care. Do you still support those things?
Listen, that was 5 years ago, and I'm very clear that I will follow the law. I have made that statement over and over again, and as Vice President of the United States, that's exactly what I've done, not to mention before.
If that's the case, you chose a running mate, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, who signed those very things into state law. So do you support that?
We are very clear, and I am very clear, as is Tim Walz, that we must support and enforce federal law, and that is exactly what we will do.
So she gives another Weasley politician non-answer. We will follow the law. If she says there's something wrong with the border right now, then she's admitting to failure, as the borders are of the Biden administration. If she says nothing is wrong, she loses a lot of people who are seeing real problems. And that's kind of an admission in itself. She knows there are problems, but the left is so trained to think that any type of restrictions or even talking about it on immigration are racist. So she's stuck. One more clip from her on this topic. This is more of Brett trying to talk over her and catch her in something.
The first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
and they didn't bring up that bill. I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising, and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
We recognized from day one that, to the point of this being your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem.
So here she refers to the 2021 bill that did not pass the House of Representatives, and maybe Trump had something to do with it, but I don't know. Half the Republicans there don't like him, and all the Democrats don't, obviously. So it's hard to say if he really had that much influence on it. And Brett's trying to point out to her that, hey, Democrats controlled the presidency, the House, and the Senate. They could have got it done. But it doesn't matter. It wouldn't have fixed anything. It would have spent more money, that's for sure. That's their favorite thing to do. It also would have made it easier for some people to get legal permanent residence, which is nice. Because if you've been living here for a while without a problem, like you take care of yourself and your family, and you're not out dealing meth or something, that pretty much proves you can be here, in my book. There are plenty of natural-born citizens that don't even do that much. Why aren't we deporting them? Rhetorical question. So Brett tries to talk over her, but she holds strong. She gets her word in. It's a priority, she says, about the one bill that they tried to get passed in the first few months, and then ignored it completely for the next 3, almost 4 years. But look, this is still a good performance for her. I know there were some bad moments, and people have picked out that she just deflected to talk about Trump many, many times, but that's pretty much what passes for political discourse today. It kind of works for her. Not saying she's going to win, or that this was great in any way, but it was good enough. And I don't believe she has any good answers to real policy questions, but not being Donald Trump just might do it for her. It worked for Joe Biden. Let me know if you think I'm crazy. Seriously, I want to hear back from people. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this episode, then head over to my Locals channel. I'll put the link in the description below for you. It's free to join, and you get access to exclusive content there, including a bonus episode featuring clips of Eric Weinstein talking about the global order that controls us all. I am biased, but it's some of my best work. Plus, there's a new bonus episode on the way very soon. Go check it out, and if you're not already, follow me on X at DropTheMaskPod for even more content. And now, back to the show. But let's move on. What is the answer at the border? I want to transition to what the right is saying about it, because there's also a lot of nonsense mixed in there. I saw this speech in the interview that Tucker Carlson put out recently, and I had to comment on it. I've shared some clips of Tucker before where he was right about some things, and he's right about some of the things here, but there's an overarching idea on the right that immigration needs to be much more restricted, and I don't necessarily agree. So let's get into it. Immigration is always a hot issue, and right now it's one of the biggest issues for people on the right, and a lot of libertarians too for that matter. But what you often find is that they will take every story of an illegal immigrant doing something bad and blow it up to paint all of them as violent criminals. You can find the left making excuses and telling you that there is no problem, and somehow you're also racist for pointing it out. There is a problem, but it's not that they're taking our jobs or that immigrants are particularly violent in general. I reject those collective statements. These are individuals. Some are bad, some are good. And it's really difficult to go through the legal process of immigration. And that's part of the problem. It's incentivizing people to cheat the system. And it's really hard to watch when good people, even people I work with, engineers, other professionals, they have to go through such a long, expensive, and randomized process to become a legal permanent resident. And then to see people just walking over the border unchecked and often being handed money on the way in, being furnished with luxury apartments with all expenses paid, is pretty freaking annoying. Then we can't even take care of our own people when a hurricane hits. This can't be happening by accident. And I want people to come in. You just have to pay your own way. That's really the only requirement. That and don't be a psycho. But all that said, there are a few problems with how the right talks about immigration. And it's not that we can't have limits. Ideally, we don't need them, but we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a world where the United States is creating horrible conditions for people around the world. They do it through direct warfare, bombing and burning cities while murdering thousands of people and displacing millions more, or through sanctions and throwing the weight of the US dollar around to get what they want, which just wrecks economies and creates the conditions where people have to flee to be able to support themselves. Haiti's a good example. Seeing that there's been a lot of talk about Haitian immigrants lately, Haiti has long had its own problems. It has some deep communist roots going back to the time of the French Revolution. It was taken over by the US in 1915, until they finally officially backed out in 1943, but still really kept their influence. It's had a handful of revolutions and regime changes since then. The Clintons helped destroy their rice farming industry in the 90s when Bill was president. And then after some devastating earthquakes in the 2000s, they collected billions of dollars through their charity to help rebuild, only to pocket like 90% of the money. The only thing they did was spend $300 million to build an industrial park, which ousted hundreds of farmers from their land and did not accomplish its goal of enticing companies to build there. So yeah, there's a lot of history. And there are reasons why there are so many migrants who have fled the place. Not least of those reasons is the US government's meddling. So we get to pay for that, and then we also get to pay for them to come here. There would be no migrant crisis without the United States government creating it with their destructive imperial tactics. And there would be far less incentive for people to get here when our welfare state provides them with more than they can make in a job in their own country, or even ours. And this is where I do have a problem with the unchecked immigration. Not that these are bad people necessarily, it's that we are paying for it on both ends. We're paying for the destruction and the migration. It's psychotic. We pay to destroy their country, their economy, among some natural disasters, of course. But then we're also paying to transport tens of thousands of people and plop them in places where they may or may not be wanted. And I'm sure these people would rather not have moved in the first place. If it was feasible to stay home, they would. So that's my take on it. But I want to use some clips from this speech because it's a good way to break down what the real problems are and where Tucker and conservatives more broadly go wrong. I've used him before as a good example on a couple issues where he called out the media for being insanely biased and hostile, and some clips of him on the Joe Rogan Experience talking about how evil politicians are. And here, he gets some things right, but there's still some right-wing programming, I think, stuck in there that I wish people would get over. Let's start with this. He sat for some questions after his speech, and in this one he's talking about wishing we could just go back, as is a common sentiment with conservative commentators. Here we go.
Just spent a month, the month of September, on the road. We went to 16 different cities, a speaking tour. And the main reason I did it, really the reason I did it, was I wanted to be in a room full of 10,000 people who believe in human freedom. I do. I just wanted that. And I wanted everyone else in the room to look around and be like, oh, I'm not crazy. There are other people here who want to live a totally normal life, who don't want to bring America back to the antebellum era, who want to bring it back to 1985. Not that long ago. Like, it was a free country. I lived here in 1985. I remember. I was dating the same girl in 1985. It was a free country. And it's not too much to ask to bring it back to 1985. That's not the Stone Ages. I don't care what they say. Oh, you're a Neanderthal. Really? 1985? I don't think so. We had way less racial tension in 1985 than we have now. You've brought it back to the Stone Ages, and you blamed us for it, as usual.
So 1985 is where he wants to go back to. The 80s are a common era that conservatives tend to like, where Reagan was president, the Cold War came to an end, we were recovering from the mega inflation of the 70s, after Nixon put the last nail in the coffin of the gold standard, plus we had all the cool neon colors and stuff. So yeah, it's not to say that nothing was better back then, just that conservatives always think there's some perfect time we can go back to. And that doesn't exist. Not in 2019, not in the 80s or 90s, not in the 1950s, and not even where I sometimes we could go back to, 1913, where the progressive era really took off and so many bad things were implemented. But no, even then, there was a lot wrong with the government and the culture. Hell, Lysander Spooner was writing entire volumes about all the problems with government and the Constitution in the mid-1800s. So some things might be worse now than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago, but some things are better. The point is, every time has its own problems to deal with. And if we just went back to 1985 or wherever you want to go, in 40 years, you'd be right back where we are now. It's not really changing anything. And of course, it's not even possible to go back anyway. So this aspect of conservatism, I just find a complete fantasy. It's not going to happen, and you wouldn't want it anyway. I think it has something to do with people getting older and remembering simpler times, but it's probably that they just weren't so aware of all the crap that happened when they were younger. And conservatives always long for what they complained about progressive doing. And conservatives always are longing for what they complained about progressives doing somewhere about a decade or two ago. I mean, look, just as an example, here's Bill Clinton in 1995 talking about immigration. It sounds a lot like conservatives now.
All Americans, not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country, are rightly disturbed by the large numbers of illegal aliens entering our country. The jobs they hold might otherwise be held by citizens or legal immigrants. The public service they use impose burdens on our taxpayers. That's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more by hiring a record number of new border guards, by deporting twice as many criminal aliens as ever before, by cracking down on illegal hiring, by barring welfare benefits to illegal aliens.
You hear it, right? They're taking our jobs. They're overloading our medical services. They're taking resources from people. It's a burden on taxpayers, and we're going to deport more people than ever. This will quickly get you labeled a racist today, even when it has nothing to do with race. And by the way, getting Bill Clinton out to campaign for you is pretty desperate, don't you think? The guy was all over Epstein's flight logs, where he's been accused of raping many women who do have convincing stories. He was caught and impeached for banging a 22-year-old intern in the Oval Office as president. The guy's a creep at a minimum, probably a statutory and maybe even a regular rapist. And if we lived in a just world, he would be wasting away in Guantanamo Bay right now. But I digress. Back to immigration. It's not people coming in organically that creates problems. But the key word is organically. There's a lot happening that is inorganic, and we'll get to that. But you know, if some people come in and buy a house or rent an apartment, that does drive up demand a little bit and would drive up prices if you don't also increase supply. When it's natural, the market adjusts. These people buy things at local businesses, and they're doing something of value as far as employment to pay for it. The rest of the local economy has time to build up more homes and stock the stores with more goods and hire more people at the hospitals to take care of those who need it. These things happen naturally in a free market, by which I don't mean it just happens by magic. No, someone recognizes the opportunity and creates more business for it to work. This is how economies grow. And if, for some reason, it doesn't happen, the people that came in looking for those things, if they don't find it, they'll move on. They can go back, they can go somewhere else where there isn't such high demand, that isn't being filled. And Tucker talks about this too, but mentions the problem when it's at a larger scale.
That's not the point. The point is not whether the people coming here are good people. Well, they've sent, tens of thousands of murderers and rapists, as you probably know. But even if they hadn't, even if every person in the 25 million allowed into the country in the last several years, even if every one of them was like a sterling person who was destined to win a Nobel Prize for some scientific innovation, it would still be an act of violence against America and our culture because it's too many people. It's too many people. The economic effects of this are obvious. Housing prices go off the charts. In the debate the other night, I laughed out loud, actually, something I've never done during a debate. When Tim Walz is like, Vance is like, well, putting tens of millions of new people in your country spikes housing prices. And Walz is like, do you have a study to confirm that? You freaking moron! What?
Okay, so yeah, even if everyone coming in is a good person, if you dump tens of thousands of people at once in a smaller city, that's going to cause problems. And this doesn't just happen with people from other countries. Like, I'm in Arizona, and people from California came bursting in by the tens of thousands, especially during the COVID years where California was locked down and people wanted out. Home prices have doubled here over the last 5 years because of it. But no one is talking seriously about shutting down the border between states. But why not, if this is such a problem? I guess the idea is something like, yeah, well, we have to deal with our own problems because it's our country, but we're stuck with these people, so we have to live with it. And okay, but why? I've seen stats that say immigrants can commit fewer crimes on average than American citizens. Who knows if that's really true or not? I would guess it's about even. But again, if this were organic, if this were people simply coming to the United States because it offers a better life, a place where their work is rewarded and they're free to operate in the market as they please, there wouldn't be a problem. Because the people that come in are self-selecting. They're the ones that you want to be here. They're the people who are looking for a better life. They want to work hard. But if people in Washington, D.C. are deciding to dump tens of thousands of refugees in a small town without permission, that is an act of aggression. Think about what this will do. If you drop them without providing basic essentials, and they can't get jobs because they don't have legal status, then they're going to do what it takes to survive, even when that includes stealing and killing. So to prevent that, if you give them food and housing and money, who's paying for it? We are. And that's not okay either. When most people are struggling to buy their own food and pay rent and all that stuff in America, we're supposed to give handouts to random people coming in? No. Tucker says it's more than that, though. That there's something else we need to be worried about.
There are all these obvious effects of mass immigration, but the one that nobody ever mentions is the most important and long-lasting effect, which is the addition of millions of new people that you have nothing in common with from a completely different culture will destroy your communities. And that's the most important thing. That can be fixed. No election's gonna fix that. No hiring of 1 million new cops is gonna fix that. All of a sudden, people aren't gonna be meeting at the churches and the bars. Not because the new people are bad people, but because they're different people. And you have nothing in common with them.
So he does say that this is an effect of mass immigration. And that's a key difference to organic free movement of people around the world. But the problem with this mass immigration, he says, is that it destroys cultures. This is a tricky one. I think he's partially right. To whatever extent there is a dominant culture in an area, if you suddenly outnumber the original population with outsiders from a completely different part of the world, yeah, it's probably going to change things. And this has happened in many places in the US. There are entire neighborhoods and towns where it's no longer a white Christian dominant place. But do people have a right to keep an entire country one thing forever? How about your state or a city? Look, I really don't have a good answer other than you have the right to your property. You have the right to associate with who you want to. And when things are being forced on people, using their own stolen money to pay for it, it starts to be a problem. But to Tucker, the problem is that you have nothing in common with these people. And yeah, it would be nice if we had a better sense of community and we took care of each other as neighbors and close friends, but that's not guaranteed to happen. Because right now, I don't have mass immigration in my neighborhood or town, and I already don't have that much sense of community. There are people I like, people I don't, people I have absolutely nothing in common with, except that we basically agree to leave each other alone. So only to the extent that another culture might find it tolerable to rape and murder or steal from me, things that are already against the law, that's when it's a real problem. But again, I go back to why this is such a problem in the first place, and the US government has a lot to do with it. But conservatives will often point to specific situations where someone was killed by an immigrant, like the Laken Riley murder, and say, this wouldn't have happened if we had a secure border. If this guy wasn't here, that girl would still be alive. And this happened just the other day. Bill Clinton was out campaigning for Kamala and brought this up and gave some of his reasons for it.
Case in Georgia not very long ago, didn't you? They made an ad about a young woman who'd been killed by an immigrant. Yeah, well, if they'd all been properly vetted, that probably wouldn't have happened. But if they're all properly vetted, and that doesn't happen, and America is not having enough babies to keep our populations up. So we need immigrants that have been vetted to do work. There wouldn't be a problem. And he couldn't keep people all torn up and upset.
So it's our fault. This is how Democrats talk about the situation. First, they'll say, there's no crisis. It's not a problem. Then, in the same breath, they'll all say that this immigration is a good thing. And third, it's also your fault. If you just had more babies, there wouldn't be a problem. And four, they'll just throw in that you're a racist for good measure. It's exhausting. It's dumb. Both sides are pretty dumb about this. And the point Clinton is trying to make here is kind of confusing. He's saying, if they'd all been properly vetted, this wouldn't have happened. Okay, but what vetting process would have prevented this? And when you keep telling everyone that trying to control immigration is racist, do you really want to solve the problem? Kamala and Democrats keep saying Trump doesn't want the problem fixed because he wants to run his campaign on that problem. And maybe there's some truth to that. But no one is really trying to fix it. There hasn't been any effort to make it easier for people to come in legally. And maybe, if we had some tighter controls, that specific case would not have happened. And it's tragic, of course, but just like when we talk about gun rights, criminals aren't going to just give up their guns. And criminals who are willing to rape and murder and illegally cross the border aren't just going to stop because there's a wall or more Border Patrol agents. They'll find ways to get where they want to go. That doesn't mean just let everyone in, unchecked. Just stop incentivizing it. Stop handing out thousands of dollars to people crossing into the country. Stop giving them free flights and buses to unload them in poor areas. One of the things that Tucker is right about is where they're putting these people.
But they would blithely just say, well, why don't they just move? Well, why don't you move, actually? Why don't we send 15,000 Haitians to your neighborhood and then call you racist when you don't like it? Or 50,000 Belgians. It doesn't matter. People who aren't from where you're from into your community. How about we do that in Martha's Vineyard, and then we'll do it in Bethesda? You know what I mean? Then we'll do it in Aspen, and then we'll try it in Jackson Hole. Why don't we do that? Why don't we do it in Bel Air, California? No, I'm serious. Why don't we do it in Lincoln, Massachusetts, and every one of the richest suburbs of Boston? We're just gonna move 50,000 Haitians into every one of those towns, and if you don't like it, if you dare to move, we're gonna call you racist on the front page of the New York Times. Why don't we try that? And why don't we do it at gunpoint, actually? And of course, we're not gonna do that because the people who live in those towns are doing it to you. And it's an act of hostility. And they've cowed the rest of us into silence with moral blackmail. Well, they live in places like, by the way, I've spent a lot of time in all the towns I just mentioned, so I know exactly what they're like. And they don't have high density housing or whatever the hell they're calling, public housing, projects. They don't have any of that. And they don't have mass immigration at all because they don't want it. And they're imposing on the rest of the country, and they're going to impose it on this state big time.
Is this a deliberate act? I don't know. It's some combination of bleeding heart liberalism, really wanting to help people, and basing policy on feelings rather than what's actually good for people. And somewhere amongst these people are probably some bad guys who do take advantage of that for their own personal gain. Rich people like immigrants, legal or illegal. If they're low skilled, they'll take less money than citizens because it's still more than they would have made back home. People with college degrees who come in legally through the visa process are great for employers too. They will also generally accept lower wages, at least for a little while. And for illegals, it drives down labor costs when they can pay people under the table. It saves them on taxes and wages. And that does actually lose opportunities for people who try to do things legitimately. There was this story going around of Haitian immigrants in Ohio eating cats. And I would say this is a bad example of demonstrating a problem. Because it was, as far as I can tell, one incident, and the one video that was going around was not a migrant at all. It was a U.S. citizen. And even if it is true, this is what I'm talking about, where people take a single thing and hold it up as this widespread problem. It does work to persuade some people who are already biased against immigrants, but to everyone else, it looks like you're being disingenuous. And that doesn't mean there aren't any problems, but it doesn't make you look honest. There were some other reports about migrants eating all the ducks in the park, and I don't know, maybe that's true too. I can't say for sure. I'm not excusing these things, but it's not just happening because people can migrate freely. There's something more going on.
Everything is Amazon and Walmart and some giant trillion-dollar company. And the effect, I think it's not just about maximizing profits or efficiency. I think the point is to homogenize, to make everything the same, to erase distinctions. The point is, when you erase differences, what are you erasing? You're erasing culture, actually. And if you have a culture, and if you have actual communities, those are worth defending. And the point of immigration is to destroy all that. That is the point. But the intent actually, the plan actually is deeper than that. It's to destroy the cultures and the communities of the people of this country by adding new people with whom the people who already live here have nothing in common.
Okay, here's where I'm at the point where I really don't know. I'm not somewhere where I can say for sure that Our government is purposely trying to do this to us. Are they trying to destroy our culture? Maybe. That is one of the effects of all this. They do everything else they can to keep us fighting about things that don't threaten their power, and this could fall into that category. Conservatives also say it's about getting Democratic voters. But if conservatives were more open-minded, and at least would say nice things about immigrants, regardless of their policy, they could get voters too. A lot of these people have very conservative values, but they feel pushed away by the Republican Party, who insists on making immigrants a boogeyman for everything. Behind the scenes, I'm sure the people that are really in charge don't care. They could actually be looking for workers because Americans are entitled and lazy. Someone's got to keep the economy going. But who knows? They can swing the vote however they want. I don't think they need voters. The break up the culture theory is as good as any, but man, it just feels like a lame excuse. First of all, there's no such thing as a single American culture. It's never been one thing. And second, if your culture is so fragile that it breaks apart when an outsider comes in, maybe it's not that good. I'm half kidding, but honestly, if you really want to save it, you're going to have to throw off the state. The United States is not what you think it is, and it never was. It's always been about pulling everyone under one umbrella of control. It's going to keep doing this to you. They don't care about your culture or your rights or your freedom. They just want to leech from you as much as possible with as little resistance as possible. So I kind of hope Kamala wins and this continues, because it might finally wake people up. Why does Washington have a say over what happens in Arizona or Wyoming? Why do New York, Texas, and California have such a big influence on national elections? Let them do their own thing. Let us do ours. That's what conservatism should be about. And it's because they're not that I'm not one. Do better. Go watch my last episode all about national divorce, and let's get that going. That's the only way that you're going to preserve anything. Otherwise, we're just at the mercy of the whims of a powerful elite that does not give a shit about you. Anyway, I went on a lot longer than I expected. Tell me what you think. Come interact on X at DropTheMaskPod, or leave a comment on the video platforms. Give a like, a rating, whatever's available, wherever you're seeing this, it helps. Thanks for watching Drop the Mask. I'll see you next time.